I have made worse decisions than boarding the Torchwood Gaunt. I have made worse decisions, I am nearly certain, though on the days when I sit in the dark of my quarters and run the feed again, the scanner logs, the boarding manifest, Keth Hunter First Vorath's last transmission, and then the 23 minutes of nothing that followed, I find it increasingly difficult to locate the specific worst decisions that I keep telling myself must exist. Surely they are there. A career as long as mine accumulates errors the way a hull accumulates micro-impact scoring, invisibly, constantly, until one day you run a structural integrity sweep and discover the damage is so deep and so evenly distributed that it no longer reads as damage at all. It reads as character. I have character in abundance. That is what I tell myself. My name is Aaron Sott. I was, a grade 7 salvage assessor for the Keth Ascendancy's Department of Reclaimed Assets. The Ascendancy keeps meticulous records of everything it acquires, everything it classifies, and everything it subsequently determines to have been a misclassification. I appear in 3 of those categories now, and the third is the one that keeps me awake. Let me tell the sequence correctly, because I have told it incorrectly 3 times before review boards, and the review boards keep sending me back with the same note appended to my file. Assessor Aaron Sott's account is inconsistent with the censor record. I am aware that my account is inconsistent with the censor record. The censor record does not capture what it felt like to watch the feeds. The censor record does not capture the specific quality of silence that descended on my command station when the first boarding confirmation signal cut out and did not resume. The censor record captures only data, and the data, I will tell you now, was wrong from the beginning. We read it correctly. The data was wrong. The contact came on what the Ascendancy's calendars mark as the 43rd day of the 8th Reclamation Survey, Outer Meridian Sector, Subsection 9. Our survey vessel, the KAS Relentless Notation, a Classification 3 survey ship with a full complement of 22 crew and a boarding team of 31 Keth hunters under the command of Hunter First Vorath, had been working the debris fields along the old transit corridor for 11 days without a significant find. The corridor had been a busy human shipping lane in the era before the Ascendancy's expansion into the outer sectors drove human traffic inward toward their central star clusters. That transit corridor was now ours. The debris it still held belonged to us by right of classification, which is a right the Ascendancy has always considered foundational and which humans had not been consulted about, because consulting prey species about the disposition of their property is not something the Ascendancy's charter requires. I did not write the charter. I merely worked under it, and I was very good at my work. On day 43, at the 3rd hour of the first watch, my junior scanner operator, a young Keth male named Eshtov who had completed his certification 18 months prior, and had the particular habit of announcing every contact with more enthusiasm than the contact warranted, said, "Assessor. Contact. Bearing 271, range approximately 43,000 units. Mass profile is significant." I remember setting down my evaluation tablet. I remember the particular quality of stillness on the command deck, the hum of the Relentless Notation's drives, the soft clicking of Eshtov's scanning array as it cycled through confirmation passes, the distant clink of someone in the galley handling cookware. I remember thinking, in the precise and professional manner of a grade 7 assessor, significant mass contact in a human transit corridor meant a human vessel. A human vessel in this corridor, this far from their current traffic patterns, this far from any station or support infrastructure, could only be one thing. "Power signatures?" I asked. Eshtov checked again. "None, assessor, the hull is cold." "Life signs?" "None detected." "Heat signature consistent with long-duration drift. I'm reading ambient temperature equalization across the hull. Whatever crew it had is gone." I recall the small sound I made. Not quite satisfaction, A grade 7 assessor does not permit herself something as undisciplined as satisfaction during initial contact assessment, something closer to professional recognition. The way a hunter feels when the pattern of broken branches confirms that the trail is fresh. Classification candidate, I said, which is the formal phrase, and I said it in the flat tone that means the assessor already knows what the classification will be and is merely observing protocol. Confirmed, said Eshtov, and he was smiling when he said it, because grade 7 assessors do not smile during classification assessments and junior operators therefore feel free to smile on their behalf. We moved to intercept. The relentless notation is not a fast ship, but she is methodical, and in my experience methodical is worth more than fast in the reclamation business. Fast ships chase contacts and occasionally find that the contact is not what the initial scan suggested. Methodical ships approach carefully, confirm everything twice, and have never once in my career delivered a misclassified prize to the reclamation dock. I had a record. I was proud of it. I am still, technically, proud of it, though I acknowledge that the record requires an asterisk now. We came up on the vessel over the course of approximately 4 hours, closing the range incrementally as our scanners refined their picture. What emerged, detail by detail, from the scanner feeds was not encouraging in the aesthetic sense, but was extremely encouraging in the professional sense. The vessel was large, larger than I had initially estimated from the mass profile, because the mass profile had suggested a mid-class transport, and what our cameras eventually resolved was something considerably more substantial. Military hull. The profile was unmistakably military. The blunt forward section, the heavy aft engineering block, the lateral sponsons that human warship designs favor for weapons emplacements, the reinforced spine that runs the full length of a fighting ship and does not appear on transport vessels, because it costs too much in mass and too much in materials to justify on a ship whose purpose is carrying cargo from one point to another without incident. She was long. I remember making that note in my assessment log. Vessel is long. It is not a particularly precise observation for a grade 7 assessor, but the length was the first thing that struck me, before I had catalogued the weapons emplacements or the hull class or the registration markings, because length, on a military vessel, is a proxy for age. Short human warships are newer. They have learned over their history of constructing these things to do more with less volume. A very long human warship is an old one, built in an era when their engineering required the space, and this vessel was very long indeed. The hull was the color of old iron. Not quite black, not quite gray, something in between, the color that metal becomes when it has been subjected to heat and vacuum and time in sufficient quantities, that it stops being one color and starts being several colors that average out to something close to gray when you are not looking too closely. The registration markings were still legible, which told me the hull's outer coating had survived whatever had brought her to this state, though the hull itself was scored and pitted in patterns consistent with weapons impact. Old weapons impacts, healed over by repair work at some point, the repaired sections still visible as slightly different shades against the overall weathered tone. I logged her registration. I cross-referenced it against the Ascendancy's captured human shipping databases, which are extensive. The database returned a result almost immediately. IHS Torchwood Gaunt, heavy cruiser, human interstellar ship designation, which means commissioned by whatever governing body administers human military affairs. Hull laid down. I remember reading this number twice because it seemed implausible. Hull laid down 207 years prior to the current date. She was old. She was very old by human reckoning. The Ascendancy's own oldest active vessels were perhaps 60 years in commission, and we consider that venerable. 207 years meant she had been built before the current generation of human military engineers had grandparents old enough to serve in any fleet. She was an antique. She was a museum piece. She was, as far as the Ascendancy's database was concerned, listed as decommissioned with a disposition notation reading, removed from active registry, hull to be repurposed or scrapped per operational requirements. Scrapped, the database thought she had been scrapped. She had not been scrapped. She was here in the outer sectors, 207 years old and cold and drifting. Hull status, I asked. Eshtav ran his full diagnostic suite. Hull integrity reads as approximately 62% on the outer plating. Inner structural members are returning unusual readings. I'm getting some interference on the deep penetration scan. The hull material is absorbing the scan more than I'd expect. Human military-grade hull plating, I said. It has reflective properties. Run the surface assessment instead. This is standard procedure when the deep scan returns interference from military hull composites. The surface tells you enough. The surface told me. Weapons emplacements present, all of them cold, no power cycling detected in any of them. The surface told me. Drive systems present, all of them cold, no exhaust signature, no power draw. The surface told me. Airlock sealed, no atmospheric bleed, consistent with full crew evacuation or full crew loss. I noted all of this. I classified it accordingly. Praetor salvage, I said. Uncontested. Abandoned military vessel, no crew, no power, no defensive capability. We'll board, complete the internal assessment, and flag for tow back to Reclamation Dock 7. Eshtav logged the classification. The Relentless Notations communication system transmitted the Ascendancy's standard salvage claim broadcast on all frequencies. A formality, since there was no one to receive it, but the Ascendancy's protocol requires it, because the Ascendancy's protocol requires everything. We matched drift velocity to the Torchwood Gaunt and held position at a distance of approximately 300 meters while Hunter First Vorath assembled his boarding team. Vorath I had worked with on 4 previous reclamation surveys. He was not a reflective individual. He was in the manner of Keth Hunters, who had achieved first designation through consistent performance rather than political advancement, extremely good at the specific thing he was trained to do and largely uninterested in anything adjacent to that specific thing. He was efficient. His team was efficient. They had boarded 11 vessels on the previous 4 surveys, secured 7 for tow, stripped 3 that were too damaged for recovery, and lost no personnel. Their record was as clean as mine. He came to my station before the boarding operation began, which was his habit, to receive the assessment briefing. I gave it in the standard format: vessel designation, hull age, classification, anticipated internal condition, recommended boarding approach. No crew, he confirmed. No life signs detected. No power. Crew either evacuated under unknown circumstances or lost to whatever event left the vessel in this condition. The hull shows old weapons damage. She's been in combat at some point, clearly, but it was long enough ago that the damage is fully weathered. She didn't come to rest here recently. Vorath looked at the camera feed showing the Torchwood Gaunt hanging in the dark 300 meters away. His expression was the particular expression that Keth Hunters use when assessing something they are about to take: analytical, flat, professionally unimpressed. The hull read on approach seemed larger than the database entry suggests, he said. The database entry has her listed as a heavy cruiser. The profile is consistent with that classification, though she runs to the longer end of the range for vessels of that type. Old design, Vorath said. Very old, over 2 centuries. He made a sound that I interpreted as dismissal. The human vessel was old, its configuration was obsolete, its condition was derelict, its threat potential was 0. These were the only facts that mattered to him, and they all pointed in the same direction. We'll use the standard approach. Grapple to the secondary airlock on the port quarter. Cutting team through the outer hatch if the lock is unresponsive. I want the engineering section first, then crew quarters, then command. Understood, I said. Broadcast a crew signal before you breach per protocol. Vorath nodded, This too was standard. You broadcast a crew warning signal before you breach any vessel, regardless of whether you believe crew is present, because the alternative is the kind of incident that generates Ascendancy tribunal proceedings, and Keth hunters of Vorath's quality do not generate tribunal proceedings. He would broadcast. There would be no response because there was no crew. The breach would proceed. The boarding assessment would take, by my estimate, approximately 3 hours. Then we would attach tow lines and bring the Torchwood Gaunt to Reclamation Dock 7, where she would be catalogued, stripped, and whatever was salvageable from a 200-year-old human military hull would be salvaged. I watched the boarding shuttle detach from the Relentless Notations hangar bay. I watched it cross the 300 meters of space between our vessel and the Torchwood Gaunt in a long, careful arc, Vorath's pilot giving the old hull a wide clearance on the approach before angling in toward the port quarter. I watched the grapple lines go out, 3 of them, thick cables with magnetic anchors at the tip, fired from the shuttle's forward launchers, and latching to the Torchwood Gaunt's hull with the soft, heavy impacts that my console's vibration sensors registered as 3 small pulses. The cables drew taut. The shuttle was anchored. Vorath's voice came over the boarding channel. In position. Broadcasting crew warning signal now. The warning signal is a standardized Ascendancy broadcast on all emergency frequencies, in all major languages, including the 3 human language families that the Ascendancy's translation corpus covers. It says, in each of those languages, that the vessel is being boarded by authorized Ascendancy reclamation personnel, that any crew should identify themselves, and that failure to respond will be interpreted as absence of crew. Standard. Routine. We had broadcasted 11 times on the previous 4 surveys. 11 times, no response. This would be the 12th. The warning broadcast went out. Silence. 20 seconds of silence, which is the protocol minimum, and then Vorath's voice again. No response. Beginning breach. I turned back to my assessment logs and began entering preliminary data. Vessel designation, classification date, estimated salvage value, which, for a human-heavy cruiser even in this condition, would be substantial. Not in functional systems, most likely. The drives would be beyond repair after this long without maintenance. The weapons would be inert and possibly stripped. But human military hull material, even 2 centuries old, has value on the materials market. The Ascendancy has uses for it. I was already calculating recovery figures when Eshtov said, very quietly, "Assessor." I looked up. "The hull temperature reading," he said. "It's changed." I crossed to his station. "Changed how?" He showed me. The hull temperature reading, which had been flat for the entire approach, consistent with a vessel that had been drifting in deep space long enough to fully equalize with ambient temperature, had shifted. Not dramatically, not alarmingly, not at first. A fraction of a degree above ambient, distributed across the hull in a pattern that Eshtov's scanner had flagged as anomalous, because the pattern was not the random distribution you would expect from solar radiation differential. It was symmetrical. It ran along the hull's structural members, the internal skeleton beneath the outer plating, in a shape that I had a great deal of difficulty interpreting for a moment, because I was interpreting it as something it could not be. It looked like heat transfer through a power distribution network. "That's a ghost reading," I said. "Residual from the grapple anchors, magnetic anchor systems generate heat on contact." "That was my first interpretation," Eshtov said, and his voice had the quality of someone who very much wanted his first interpretation to be correct. "But the distribution pattern doesn't match anchor contact points. It's running longitudinally, along the spine." I stared at the reading. "Run a second pass on the power signature scan." He did, still reading cold. "No active power systems." "Then we have an anomalous temperature reading that is not accompanied by power activity," I said. "Log it as instrument artifact and continue monitoring." Because that was the logical conclusion. The deep penetration scan had already demonstrated that the hull material interfered with our scanning equipment. An anomalous temperature reading in a ship with known scan interference properties was an artifact. It was the only thing it could be. We had confirmed multiple times that the vessel was without power. You cannot have heat transfer through a power distribution network if there is no power. I went back to my assessment log. Eshtav continued monitoring. On the boarding channel, I heard the sounds of the breach, the cutting torch activating, the hiss and pop of the outer airlock hatch being worked, Voreth's team communicating in the clipped shorthand that hunters use during an entry. No words I needed to pay close attention to. Operational noise. I was compiling my preliminary assessment figures. Outer hatches through, Voreth reported, moving to the inner lock. Confirmed, I said. Note for the record that the inner lock will be sealed. Standard crew evacuation protocol on human military vessels locks all interior pressure barriers. You'll need the cutting team through. Understood. More sounds, the cutting torch again. Longer this time, the inner locks on military vessels are heavier than outer hatches, built for combat conditions, built to resist. I listened with the part of my attention that I kept on the boarding channel while the rest of my attention compiled figures. 2 minutes. 3. The cutting sound changed in quality and then Voreth said, "Inner lock is through. We're in." Confirmed. Proceed to engineering. A pause then. The internal lighting is active. I set down my evaluation tablet. Repeat that, I said. The internal lighting is active, Voreth said again. Red spectrum, low intensity. It appears to be emergency battery lighting consistent with a vessel that's been on minimal backup power since crew evacuation. Emergency battery lighting. Of course. A military vessel, even decommissioned, even drifting for an unknown period, would have emergency battery systems that could maintain minimal lighting essentially indefinitely. The batteries used in military emergency systems have extremely long discharge periods by design. This was not alarming. This was, if anything, confirmation that the Torchwood Gaunt had indeed been crewed at some point, that the crew had indeed evacuated under controlled conditions rather than been lost to catastrophic hull breach, and that the emergency systems had simply continued doing what emergency systems do. Nominal. Explainable. Noted, I said. Log it as emergency battery discharge. Continue to engineering. Eshtav touched my arm. I do not permit junior operators to touch me during assessments, and he knew this, and the fact that he did it anyway told me that he had found something he did not want to transmit verbally over the station's open log channel. I looked at his scanner display. The hull temperature reading had changed again. It was no longer a fraction of a degree above ambient. It was several degrees above ambient, and the pattern had intensified. The symmetrical distribution along the structural members was brighter now on his false color display, denser, the lines thicker where they converged at the aft section around the engineering block and the drive housings. And it was moving. Not quickly. Slowly, in the manner of heat moving through dense material. But it was moving, spreading from the engineering block outward through the hull's skeleton, in a direction that my professional assessment of heat transfer diagrams told me was exactly the direction heat moves through a power distribution network, when power is cycling up from a cold start. I need a third pass on the power signature scan, I said very quietly. I've already run it, Eshtav said. Reading is still cold. The scan is not detecting active power systems. That is not possible, I said, if this temperature reading is accurate. The scan may not be detecting them, Eshtav said, because the hull material is absorbing the scan, the interference we noted on the initial approach. I stared at the display for a long moment. Voreth, I said on the boarding channel, how far into the vessel is your team currently? We're in the main corridor moving aft, approximately 70 meters in from the breach point. The interior it's in better condition than I expected. Surfaces are clean. No decay evidence, no corrosion on the interior fittings. It doesn't look like a ship that's been drifting for a long time. I want you to stop moving, I said. A pause. Assessor. I want you to hold your current position. I have an anomalous reading that I need to resolve before you proceed further into the vessel. A longer pause. Voreth was not accustomed to being asked to hold position during a boarding assessment. In his experience, and in mine, boarding assessments did not produce situations that required holding position. They produced situations that required moving forward efficiently and cataloging what you found. What kind of anomalous reading? He asked. Hull temperature distribution inconsistent with ambient drift. I'm also noting that the vessel's interior condition, as you've described it, is inconsistent with the length of drift suggested by the hull's external state. I kept my voice even. I kept it at the register of professional caution, which is different from alarm. Professional caution is the appropriate register for a grade 7 assessor encountering an anomalous reading that has 2 or 3 possible explanations, most of them mundane. Alarm is the appropriate register for something else. I was not yet in the territory of something else. I want to run an additional diagnostic sweep before you proceed. Give me 4 minutes. Understood, Voreth said. Team is holding. I ran the additional diagnostic sweep. I ran it 3 times, with Eshtav double-checking my parameters on each pass, because if I was going to ask Hunter First Voreth to maintain his team in a stationary position inside a vessel we had classified as dead salvage, I wanted to be able to justify it with data that a review board could examine and find reasonable. The diagnostic sweeps returned the same results each time. Power signature scan, negative. No active power systems detected. Hull temperature distribution, anomalous and continuing to shift. The pattern was now covering approximately 60% of the outer hull as visible on the false color display. The symmetrical lines of elevated temperature running along the spine from stern to bow, and through the lateral structural members, and up into the... I noted this with the careful neutrality of someone noting a fact that they are not yet ready to interpret, up into the lateral sponsons, where the weapon's emplacement sat cold and dark on the camera feeds. Voreth, I said, I want you to withdraw your team to the airlock. Another pause longer than the previous one. Assessor, we are 70 meters into the vessel. We have confirmed no life signs. The vessel is displaying a hull temperature distribution pattern that I cannot currently explain, I said. As a precautionary measure, while I resolve this diagnostic anomaly, I am asking your team to withdraw to the airlock. This is within my authority as the presiding assessor on this operation. It is, in fact, within my authority. A grade 7 assessor can suspend a boarding operation for cause at any point. The bar for cause is deliberately low because the Ascendancy has found over the course of many reclamation surveys that the cost of a false suspension is a delayed assessment and some professional irritation, whereas the cost of proceeding without adequate cause review can be considerably higher. I was exercising legitimate professional judgment. Voreth would comply. He would be irritated. That was acceptable. Understood, Voreth said, and the flatness in his voice was the specific flatness of a Keth hunter who is complying with a request he considers unnecessary and who is cataloging the request for later professional comment. Team, begin withdrawal. Back to the airlock. Single file. I heard the shuffle and movement of 31 hunters turning around in a corridor, boots on decking, the soft sounds of equipment being repositioned. Then, so soft that I initially interpreted it as a sound artifact in my earpiece, a digital ghost in the channel, a sound from somewhere deeper in the vessel, something I could not immediately categorize. A low, resonant sound, felt more than heard, the kind of sound that very large mechanical systems make when they begin moving after a long period of stillness. The settling of mass. The first breath of a thing that has been holding its breath for a very long time. On Eshdav's display, the hull temperature distribution reached 100% coverage simultaneously. "Vorath," I said. The lights changed. I saw it on the boarding team's visual feed. The emergency battery lighting, red and low, had been joined by something else. Something running the same circuits but driven by a source orders of magnitude more powerful. The corridors of the Torchwood Gaunt went from dim red to full illumination in the space of a second, white light flooding every passageway, and in the boarding team's cameras I could see, suddenly and clearly, what Vorath had meant when he said the interior was in better condition than expected. The corridors were not merely clean. They were operational. There was no dust, no corrosion, no the accumulated neglect of an abandoned ship. There were status lights on the wall panels, green status lights, reading active, reading nominal, reading system functional. There were displays that had woken up along the corridor walls, showing readouts in a language that I recognized as a human script and could not read, but whose format I recognized from the Ascendancy's training materials on human military vessel design as the format of a ship status display. The kind of display that shows a crew the condition of their vessel's systems, so the crew can know at a glance that the drives are functioning, and the weapons are powered and the hull integrity is confirmed, and there is, in every meaningful respect, nothing wrong with the ship. "Run," I said. Vorath did not ask why. I will say that for him. Keth hunters who reach first designation do not ask why when an assessor says run. They run, and they ask why later if there is a later, and in my experience this is the single most important quality a boarding team can have, and it is the quality that the Ascendancy's hunter training program reliably produces. 31 hunters ran. I heard it in the channel, the immediate shift from controlled withdrawal to controlled sprint, boots hitting decking at speed, the hiss of breathing through exertion, Vorath's voice very flat and very calm giving the order to increase pace. "Airlocks," he said, "full speed." They were 70 meters in. The airlock was 70 meters back. A Keth hunter in full boarding kit can cover 70 meters in approximately 12 seconds under good conditions. The conditions inside the Torchwood Gaunt were, as far as I could see from the camera feeds, structurally ideal, no obstructions in the corridor, flat deck surface, good light. They should have been able to make it in 12 seconds. I watched the camera feeds. At the 8-second mark, the interior blast doors sealed. I had not known the Torchwood Gaunt had interior blast doors. They were not visible in any configuration I had examined of human heavy cruiser design from that era. They may have been installed later in refit. They may have always been there and designed to retract invisibly into the corridor walls. I did not know. What I knew was that at the 8-second mark, on every camera feed simultaneously, thick armored panels emerged from concealed recesses in the corridor walls and met in the middle with a sound that the boarding team's audio sensors captured as a deep, resonant boom that I felt in the deck of the relentless notation 300 meters away, as if the Torchwood Gaunt had made a single deliberate sound and wanted to make sure everyone in the vicinity understood that the sound was deliberate. The camera feeds went dark one at a time. Not all at once. That is important. They went dark one at a time, in a sequence, starting from the rearmost positions in the boarding team's formation and moving forward. At 8 seconds and 3 heartbeats, the last camera in the column went out. Then moving forward through the team, each camera went dark in turn as whatever was happening to the hunter carrying it concluded. It took 1 minute and 47 seconds from the first camera going dark to the last. I watched all of it. I watched every second of it. I am a grade 7 assessor. My job is to observe and record accurately. I observed. I recorded. On the audio channel, sound continued for longer than the visual. I have not described the audio in my review board testimonies, not because I am concealing it, but because language does not do it justice in any register I have available to me. There were no screams. I want to be precise about that. There were no screams, which is both better and worse than the alternative, depending on what you decide it implies. There was the sound of boots on decking, the sound of Keth hunters moving as fast as Keth hunters can move. There was the sound of equipment striking hull surfaces. There was, at intervals that grew briefer as the sequence moved forward through the team, each audio feed going quiet at the moment its camera went dark. The sounds did not stop abruptly, the way a signal drops when a transmitter is destroyed. They stopped the way a sound stops when the thing producing it is no longer producing it. I am a grade 7 assessor. I write what I observe. What I observed was that the sound stopped in sequence, moving forward through the team over the course of 1 minute and 47 seconds, and that I could do nothing to alter that sequence and had known, from the moment the blast doors sealed, that I could do nothing. The last camera to go dark was Vorath's. He was at the front of the column, 4 meters from where the blast door had sealed across the corridor between his team and the airlock. He was 4 meters from the exit when his camera went dark, which means he was aware of that proximity, which means he saw the door between himself and the airlock and knew what the distance represented. And the last image his camera transmitted was the door, close up, the surface of it. And I know this because I have examined the still frame many times in the dark of my quarters on the nights when I run the feed again. The surface of the door showed no damage. No marks from any attempt to breach it. No scratches, no tool marks, no evidence of any effort by 31 Keth hunters to go through it or around it. The last thing Vorath's camera transmitted was the door, intact, and then the feed cut. I sat at my assessment station for an unknown period of time. Eshtov was not speaking. The relentless notations deck was very quiet. On my scanner display, the Torchwood Gaunt's hull temperature reading was now showing full coverage at levels consistent with an active, fully operational vessel drive system cycling, weapons system cycling, sensors active across the hull in a pattern that looked, when I forced myself to look at it clearly, like the scan profile of a warship that had just finished whatever it had been in the middle of doing and was now turning its attention outward. The grapple lines were still attached. 3 magnetic anchor cables running from the boarding shuttle to the Torchwood Gaunt's hull, holding the shuttle in place against the larger vessel. I watched the Torchwood Gaunt's hull. I watched the points where the magnetic anchor cables were attached. I watched the hull plates at those points begin to change configuration. Not violently, not explosively, with the calm, deliberate precision of a system that has done this before and sees no need to rush. The hull plates moved in a sequence, reconfiguring around the anchor cables, and then the anchors detached, not because the relentless notation systems released them, but because the Torchwood Gaunt's hull mechanics, moving with that same calm, deliberate precision, simply removed them. Plate by plate, mechanism by mechanism, the 3 anchor points were cleared of the boarding shuttle's cables, and the cables, freed, drifted. The boarding shuttle drifted too. Without its anchor to the larger vessel, it had no propulsion engaged and no pilot at the controls. The pilot had crossed with the boarding team, and it simply continued at the velocity it had held while anchored, which carried it slowly away from the Torchwood Gaunt's hull in the direction of empty space. The Torchwood Gaunt did not pursue it. The Torchwood Gaunt instead turned. I want to be precise about what I mean when I say the Torchwood Gaunt turned, because the word suggests a certain kind of motion, a gradual reorientation, the ponderous arc of a large vessel changing heading over the course of minutes, the way that ships of significant mass are required to change heading given the physics of their drive systems. That is not what the Torchwood Gaunt did. The Torchwood Gaunt rotated, around an axis I could not immediately calculate, in a manner that my ship movement sensor flagged with a full priority alert because the rotational rate was inconsistent with any drive system I had in my reference database for a vessel of this displacement. She rotated. She oriented. In the time it took me to process the full priority alert, understand what it was telling me, and look at the camera feed showing her current aspect relative to the relentless notation. She had completed the maneuver and was facing us. Facing us directly, her bow was pointed at us. I can tell you what the bow of the IHS Torchwood Gaunt looks like at a range of 300 meters, fully illuminated by her own running lights, and the sensor sweeps she was now actively broadcasting across the local volume. I have spent considerable time examining this. The bow is blunt, by the standards of what I know of human warship design, no ornamental shaping, no graceful tapering, no concession to anything other than function. It is a wall of hull plating, reinforced at the edges, with the weapons emplacements visible now because they were no longer retracted. They had extended while she turned. They were extended when I looked up and saw her bow pointed at us. I do not know exactly when they extended because I had been processing the rotational alert rather than watching the weapon status. By the time I was watching, they were already out. How many weapons emplacements? I am asked this every time I give this account, and every time I give the same answer, which is that I am not sure. The Torchwood Gaunt is listed in the Ascendancy's captured human military databases as a heavy cruiser, and the armament listed for her class and era is specific and well documented, and I had read that documentation in the course of my assessment, and I knew what she should have. But I had looked at her weapons emplacements from the forward aspect, and I had not been counting them. I had been looking at the general configuration, and the general configuration told me one thing clearly, which is that the number of weapons now aimed at the relentless notation significantly exceeded what the database entry described, and that the discrepancy was large enough that I could not attribute it to database error or generational upgrade. She had been modified. At some point in her 207-year operational history, the Torchwood Gaunt had been modified, and the modifications had been extensive, and none of them were in the Ascendancy's database, because the Ascendancy's database did not know about the modifications because the vessel was listed as decommissioned, and the Ascendancy had not been watching. She did not fire. I want to be clear about this. She had the range, the bearing, and the weapons free to fire on the relentless notation, and she did not fire. She held position, bow toward us, weapons extended, and she did nothing for a period of approximately 3 minutes and 20 seconds, during which I sat at my assessment station, and Eshtov sat at his scanner station, and the relentless notation's crew, who had all by this point understood that something was happening and were at their stations awaiting orders, sat in a silence that I can only describe as the silence of entities that understand they are in the presence of something that has not yet decided what to do with them. The Ascendancy's charter, which covers all scenarios a survey vessel might encounter, has a protocol for a situation in which a classified salvage target proves to not be salvageable. It does not have a protocol for a situation in which a classified salvage target proves to not be dead. There is no protocol. There is no precedent. Grade 7 assessors are trained to recognize the boundaries of their operating protocols and to act conservatively when those boundaries are reached. I acted conservatively. "All crew," I said, in the flat voice that I used for formal announcements, "we are standing down from reclamation operations. Helm, bring us to a full stop relative to the contact. Navigation, do not alter our heading. Communications, broadcast." I paused here. I was composing in real time a transmission to send to a human warship that had, in the past 3 minutes, demonstrated that our classification of it as dead salvage was incorrect in every particular. I needed to find the right words. "Communications," I said again. "Broadcast on all human-compatible frequencies. Audio only. The following message. This is the Keth Ascendancy survey vessel relentless notation. We are standing down. We made a classification error. We are standing down." I did not know if the Torchwood Gaunt could receive our transmissions. I did not know if there was anyone aboard to receive them, or if the vessel's response to the boarding team had been autonomous. A ship with enough computational capacity to manage its own systems, its own defenses, without requiring crew direction? I have thought about this question extensively since. I have not resolved it. The Torchwood Gaunt gave no indication either way. She held position for 3 more minutes. Her weapons remained extended. Then, in the same deliberate, unhurried manner that had characterized everything she had done since waking, she began to move. Not toward us, away from us. Her drives lit, and here I want to note that her drives lit in a way that was, again, inconsistent with her listed class. The exhaust signature on Eshtov's scanner was not the signature of a heavy cruiser. It was significantly larger. It was, in the rough taxonomy of human drive signatures that the Ascendancy scanner training materials cover, more consistent with a vessel considerably larger and more powerful than a heavy cruiser, which means that the Torchwood Gaunt's drive system had also been modified, at some point, in ways that the database did not reflect. She accelerated, not slowly. Not in the ponderous manner of a large vessel working against her own inertia. She accelerated with the directness of something that has no need to be cautious about its acceleration, because its structural tolerances are rated for it. And within 30 seconds, she was moving at a velocity that my scanner had difficulty tracking cleanly, and within 3 minutes she was beyond our effective sensor range. She was gone. I sat at my assessment station for a long time after she left. The relentless notations bridge was quiet in the way that spaces are quiet after something large has happened, and the people in the space have not yet determined how to reintegrate that thing into the normal operation of their lives. My crew were at their stations. They were not speaking. Eshtov's scanner feeds showed empty space in the direction the Torchwood Gaunt had gone. His hands were very still on his console. I had worked with Eshtov for 3 surveys. I had never seen his hands completely still before. He was, as a rule, the kind of young operator who fidgets with his equipment even when there is nothing to do with it, who runs unnecessary calibration checks because the movement itself is a comfort. His hands were still. I noted this. I did not comment on it. There was nothing useful to say. The preliminary assessment figures I had been compiling were still on the display. Hull classification, estimated salvage value, projected recovery timeline, dock assignment. I had filled in approximately 2/3 of the fields. The remaining third were blank. I cleared the form. The relentless notation remained at station for another 2 hours, completing sensor sweeps of the local volume, and confirming that the Torchwood Gaunt's departure bearing put her on a heading toward the inner sectors. Toward, eventually, human space. Toward the place where whatever passed for human military authority resided, and where someone, perhaps, knew that the Torchwood Gaunt was still operational, still out here. Still doing whatever it was she had been doing in the outer sectors, before we arrived and introduced 31 Keth hunters into her hull. We recovered the boarding shuttle. It was undamaged. Its pilot's console showed that the shuttle's systems had been accessed during the period when the Torchwood Gaunt was nearby. Not by us, not by the boarding team, but by the Torchwood Gaunt's own systems, which had, in the course of the encounter, connected to the shuttle's navigation database and done something with what they found there. The navigation database showed a new entry. A single record, inserted by an external system at the timestamp corresponding to the period when the shuttle was drifting free of the Torchwood Gaunt's hull. The record contained only a bearing, a heading expressed in standard astrogation notation pointing toward Keth Ascendancy space. Not all of it, not in general, a specific point in Keth Ascendancy space. The location of the Ascendancy's Department of Reclaimed Assets, Outer Meridian Sector Administrative Offices, our home office, the office that had issued the survey authorization for this sector, and the authority under which we had classified the Torchwood Gaunt as Praetor salvage. The Torchwood Gaunt had looked through the shuttle's navigation database and left a message. She had found the authorization source for the operation that had sent 31 hunters into her hull, and she had recorded its location. And she had left a note, or something that functioned as a note. in a navigation system that she knew we would retrieve. I am a Grade 7 assessor. My job is to observe and record accurately. I observed. I recorded. I transmitted the full sensor log and my preliminary incident report to the Ascendancy's Department of Reclaimed Assets within 6 hours of the Torchwood Gaunt's departure, with a recommendation, the first recommendation of its kind in my career, in a career that had never before required me to recommend anything of this nature, that the department immediately cease all reclamation survey operations in subsections 7 through 14 of the outer meridian sector, pending a comprehensive review of all outstanding human military hull classifications, with particular attention to any vessel whose database entry includes the notation removed from active registry, hull to be repurposed or scrapped per operational requirements. I know what that notation means now. I have thought about it extensively. Removed from active registry, not decommissioned in the operational sense of the word, which means weapons stripped, drives removed, systems disabled, hull sold or melted. Removed from the registry, taken off the list, made officially and deliberately to not exist in any database that an external party might access. The hull to be repurposed per operational requirements. Per operational requirements that were apparently set by whoever in human military administration decided that a 207-year-old heavy cruiser, extensively modified and fully operational, was more useful deployed invisibly in the outer sectors than listed in any archive. A vessel that did not exist officially, and therefore could not be classified, could not be assessed, could not be found unless you were a Grade 7 assessor who was very good at her job and happened to stumble across it because it happened to be drifting where a drift was useful. I do not know what the Torchwood Gaunt was doing in the outer sectors. I do not know if it was alone. I do not know how many vessels the human military has removed from its active registry and deployed in this fashion, in the spaces between stars that the Ascendancy has claimed but not yet fully surveyed, looking like abandoned salvage until something boards them. I know what happened to 31 Keth hunters who boarded the one I found. I know what the Torchwood Gaunt left in our navigation database. The Department of Reclaimed Assets suspended survey operations in subsections 7 through 14 of the outer meridian sector pending review. The review has been ongoing for 4 months. I am told it may take considerably longer, because the review requires the Ascendancy's Military Intelligence Division to re-examine its existing human military vessel database entries for every vessel bearing the notation removed from active registry. And there are, as it turns out, rather more such entries than anyone at the Department of Reclaimed Assets had previously considered relevant to survey operations. Because previously we had interpreted that notation as meaning the vessel no longer existed as an active threat, we had interpreted it as a category, a classification. We had put it in a column. I was very good at classification. I am told I am still very good at classification. I have not returned to active survey duty since the incident. I am told I will return to active survey duty when the review is complete, and the department has determined appropriate protocols for any future encounters with vessels of this classification, which is to say when someone figures out what classification applies to a ship that has been officially deleted from its own people's records and sent out into the dark to wait for something to board it. I do not have a classification to offer. I have spent 4 months trying to build one, and I have not succeeded, because the defining characteristic of the Torchwood Gaunt was that it fit nowhere in the Ascendancy's existing taxonomy. We have categories for active warships, and we have categories for derelict hulls, and we have categories for everything in between, and the Torchwood Gaunt was, simultaneously, fully consistent with the derelict hull category until the moment it was not, and then it was not anything in any category we have, because we do not have a category for a ship that chooses, deliberately, to read as dead until something decides to board it. We do not have a category for a ship that waits. We do not have a category for a ship that can afford to wait, because it has been waiting for 207 years and has no particular reason to be in a hurry. We do not have a category for a ship that looks through your shuttle's navigation database after it is finished and records the address of the people who sent the hunting party and leaves a note. I have thought in the dark of my quarters about the nature of that note. It is not a threat. It contains no words, only a location. A location could mean many things. It could mean, I know where you are. It could mean, I will come to where you are. It could mean, tell the people who authorized this operation that I know where they are so that they may consider this information when they authorize the next one. It could mean something I have not thought of, something in a human register of communication that I do not fully understand, and that the Ascendancy's translation corpus does not cover, because translation corpora cover words and this message had no words. I asked the department's analyst team what they thought it meant. They produced a report. The report was 12 pages long and contained, in my professional assessment, 12 pages of uncertainty wrapped in the syntax of certainty. I read it twice. I set it down. I thought about Vorath, who ran when I told him to run and was still 4 meters short of the door. I thought about the 30 others who were further back than Vorath. I thought about Eshtav sitting at his scanner, telling me the power signature scan was still reading cold, while the temperature distribution was spreading across the hull. I thought about the interval between when I told Vorath to hold position and when I told him to run, and what I would have done differently, and the answer I keep arriving at is, I should have told him to run at the same moment I told him to hold position, which is to say, I should have told him to run the moment the temperature reading changed, which is to say, I should have recognized what I was looking at before I recognized what I was looking at. I was very good at classification. Classifications are built from data. The data said the Torchwood Gaunt was cold, was unpowered, was without crew, was dead salvage. The data was wrong, and the data was wrong because the Torchwood Gaunt wanted the data to be wrong. And a ship that can make its own data wrong is not a ship that belongs in any of the Ascendancy's existing categories, because none of our existing categories account for a ship that is also a predator. That decides when it is found. That controls what the scanner sees. That reads dead until something gets inside it, and then stops being dead. The Ascendancy has many categories. The Ascendancy classifies everything. We have always classified everything. It is foundational. It is how we understand the universe, by sorting it into the appropriate columns, giving each thing the designation that tells you what it is and what it is not and therefore how to treat it. The Torchwood Gaunt was 207 years old. She had been in the Ascendancy's database for at least part of that time, listed under a notation that we had sorted into the decommissioned column and stopped thinking about. She had been in that column for long enough that whatever crew had been there at the beginning, whatever human engineers and commanders and junior officers had been the ones who originally took her off the active registry and pointed her toward the outer sectors and told her to wait, those people were dead. Not recently dead. Long dead. The people who built the IHS Torchwood Gaunt's current configuration were dead before the Keth Ascendancy expanded into the outer sectors. They were dead before anyone in the Ascendancy knew there was an outer sector worth expanding into. They had built a ship. They had sent it out. They had removed it from every record so that no database would show it existed, so that no scanner reading would flag it as active, so that it would read as salvage to anyone who found it. They had done all of this, and then they had died because people die, and the ship had continued because ships, this particular ship, continue. I think about what kind of people build that. I think about what kind of civilization looks at the problem of the frontier and solves it by building a ship that looks dead and waits, for years, for decades, for however long it takes, and responds appropriately to anything that decides the ship is worth boarding. I think about the resources involved, the engineering, the patience, the specific quality of mind that says, We will not be there to see it work, and that is fine because it will work. I think about how many of them there might be. Out there, in the outer sectors that the Ascendancy has claimed but not fully surveyed, drifting in the debris fields and the empty corridors, reading as cold and dead on every scanner, removed from every active registry, waiting in the dark for something to board them. My evaluation tablet still has the classification form open, the one I cleared when the Torchwood Gaunt left. I keep starting new forms and then stopping because I don't know what to put in the classification field. Every time I try, I find myself sitting for a long time with my stylus above the field and nothing coming to me, because the appropriate classification does not exist, and I have spent 4 months trying to build one, and the 4 months have produced nothing that I can put in a column and close. The Ascendancy classifies everything. I used to believe that meant everything could be classified. I used to believe that was the same thing. The review board will convene again in 3 weeks. I have been told to prepare an updated account, incorporating any new details that recollection has surfaced since my previous testimony. I have been preparing that account for 3 weeks. It says what this account says. It says what all my accounts have said. We found the vessel, we classified it, we boarded it, the classification was wrong, the vessel corrected our understanding of it, the boarding party did not return. I do not have new details. I have the same details. I have 1 minute and 47 seconds, and 31 Keth hunters moving forward through the sequence, and Voreth's camera showing the blast door intact and undamaged, and the Torchwood Gaunt's hull temperature reading going to full coverage simultaneously, and the bearing she left in the navigation database pointing at our home office, and the silence after she left. That is what I have. That is everything I have. That is, I suspect, everything there is to have, and the review board's difficulty, and mine, is that it is simultaneously too little and more than enough.